Creating Thunder, The Dreams of Nikola Tesla.
The great wireless tower stood unfinished before me. Rain fell hard and fast. Far away I could see the flash of lightning, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder. It was as if the storms themselves were paying me back for mastering them all those years ago. Laborers walked away from the tower with their bags. My financial supporters had withdrawn, and we'd run out of money. The tower would have allowed radio communication across the world. I was sure of it. Now my dreams were in tatters. This was my greatest defeat. As I stared at the incomplete structure, I thought about my career in America, how far I had come, halfway across the world, to astound the American people with the power of my electricity and the sound of my thunder. I was born in 1856 in Smiljan, which was then in the Austrian Empire. It was in a mountainous region of what is now in Croatia. The area is very beautiful, though it can be quite cold. Apparently, I was born during a savage electrical storm, a hint, perhaps, as to what would happen later in my life. My family was Serbian. My father was a priest, and my mother was very smart. My father hoped I'd join the priesthood, but I was fascinated by science. My mother was an inventor of small household equipment, much of which set my mind racing. How wonderful to be able to create things that make the world an easier place to live in. I wanted to do the same. One day, when I was just a child, I watched my brother riding his horse. Dane was a terrific horse rider. He made the horse prance and jump, all while laughing and whooping. It was exciting to watch. I could not contain myself. I cried out in amazement. Then, suddenly, the horse was spooked. It leaped and bucked. Dane shot into the air. For a moment he seemed to hover there. Then he crashed down to the ground. "Dane!" I cried out. I rushed over to him, but he wasn't breathing. "Dane!" Dane never woke up, and it changed our family. I was so young when I lost my brother, and my world was never quite the same without him in it. When I was older, I studied at the University of Graz to become an engineer. I was a brilliant student. My biggest strength came from my intense focus. I could focus on one project for hours or days. The one project that I was most focused on was the Gram dynamo, a machine that could create electricity. I remember looking at the amazing machine and feeling the ideas firing off in my head. It was there that I came up with the idea of alternating currents, AC, of electricity. It's a bit hard to explain, but it was a new idea in the study of electricity. The old method of electricity was called direct current, DC, but it couldn't be transmitted efficiently. AC would overcome this problem. My teacher laughed at my idea. I didn't care. I understood better than he did. After university, I joined the Continental Edison Company. Thomas Edison was the most famous inventor in the world, and, with the help of others, had invented the electric light bulb. As part of my work, I helped install light bulbs in the Paris Opera House. However, I knew that I had to move to America. America was the center of invention. That was where many of the most interesting inventions were happening. So I sailed for New York in 1884. When I arrived, I had nothing but a few of my old poems, the calculations for a flying machine, and 4 cents. I stood in the bustle of Manhattan with joy in my heart. Now I needed to meet the great Thomas Edison, who was a hero to me. In my pocket, I carried a letter of introduction from one of Edison's associates. The path was open to me. How I remember the first time I met Edison himself. I was thrilled. He had revolutionized the world and had the confidence of a man who had done so. I couldn't wait to show him my motor that was based on alternating currents. When he saw me, he said, "So this is the young Turk. Tesla, is it?" "Yes, sir, but I'm afraid I'm Serbian," I replied. He laughed at that. "It's a figure of speech. So, you'd better come work for me." At first, Edison and I worked well together. But when I eventually mentioned my idea for an AC motor, he changed. I didn't really understand that he had built his business on the old system of electricity. He had an interest in keeping things the way they were. Then, one day Edison said to me, "Tesla, if you can design a better DC generator for me, I'll pay you $50,000. What do you say to that?" "I'm glad to take the challenge," I said. So I stayed every night in the laboratory and the workshops, working and working. I worked from 10:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next day. Then, as it always happened, the solution came to me in flashes. Soon I had improved Edison's motors more than anyone could believe. When I saw Edison, I said, "Sir, I have made a $50,000 discovery." Edison examined my solution and said, "You've done well, Nokola, but you must understand the American sense of humor. I didn't really mean I would give you $50,000. There can be no describing how devastated I was. I walked out and never returned. Feeling betrayed, I left Edison's company to set up my own electrical company. While I tried to find financial backers, I was forced to take a job digging ditches for $2 a day. The ditches were for Edison's electrical cables. How cruel the world could be. Finally, some financial backers supported me, and I set up my laboratory on a street called Liberty Street. Around this time, I made friends with Mark Twain. Twain was one of America's most famous writers, and, just like me, he was fascinated with technology. I remember the day he came to my laboratory, and we took a photo of him holding a bright light. By 1888, I introduced the alternating current AC motor, which was one of my most famous discoveries. I set up exhibitions to demonstrate that the alternating currents were safe. In these, I allowed electricity to flow through my body and light up bulbs. When I showed people at the exhibitions, the gasps were audible. "It's not possible," said one man. "It's like magic," cried another woman. I was triumphant. I knew alternating currents would conquer the world. Soon, I sold the technology and became rich. Edison was filled with envy. He campaigned against the new AC electrical motors. I was not interested in getting married, as I felt that it would only distract me from my work. Anyway, I had many phobias, or fears, that made getting close to anyone difficult. For example, I didn't like shaking people's hands. Indeed, I was very eccentric. So I began to work on many other inventions. In particular, I worked on the wireless, or radio, as it is now called. Alas, disaster struck, for a fire broke out in my laboratory. Totally devastated, I went to my bed and didn't rise for some time. Though I restarted my work on the wireless, others took the credit. I did develop a radio-controlled boat, however. Perhaps it was my personal crisis around this time that made me interested in Eastern philosophy, or another way of thinking about life. The universe then appeared to me to be a great song composed of waves. Everywhere there was energy. Everything was spinning. From this time on, my ideas began to verge on philosophy, and some people thought I went too far. In 1899, I moved to Colorado Springs for a series of secret experiments. I made perhaps an even more important discovery. There, I built a building, and inside the building, a grand machine for creating lightning. When I turned on my lighting machine, huge bursts shot out from the ball at the top of the building. The sound was incredible, for I had created thunder as well. In fact, the locals must have thought I was a mad scientist, for the thunder was heard 15 miles away. Then, everything stopped. A fire had started in the local power stations immediately after my experiment. I had used too much of their power, and the station was ruined. In Colorado Springs, I used the earth as a conductor for electricity. I lit up a field of 200 lamps by sending electricity through the ground. Nearby, horses began to skip and dance as the electricity passed into their horseshoes. My next project was to build the wireless tower that has now come to nothing. I made a blunder. Rather than build a tower to transmit messages like a radio, my plan was to build a tower to transmit energy. My financial backers withdrew their funds because they didn't believe in my ideas. I am ruined. Others have made fortunes with my inventions, and I have almost nothing. I am sure, though, that one day I will be remembered. Until then, I'll have to leave this tower to the rain.
Nikola Tesla's inventions and developments. Alternating current electricity. Remote control. Wireless technology. Neon lights. X-ray photographs.
So I walk away from the wireless tower in the rain. However, my head is still filled with many ideas. I have thousands of them in my notebooks. I'll still keep trying. I'll keep working on transmitting energy and power. I'll keep trying to invent things to change the world, to make it an easier place to live in. I am not interested in money. I am interested in science. That is what is important to me.
Discuss. 1. The narrator says, I thought about my career in America, how far I had come, halfway across the world, to astound the American people with the power of my electricity and the sound of my thunder. What is the thunder the narrator refers to? 2. In the first paragraph of the text, the narrator says, It was as if the storms themselves were paying me back. What do you think this means? How does this affect the rest of the story?